Together, we are going to show ourselves and each other the way. And one of the strongest ways that I know is forgiveness. Marianne Williamson wrote, "The practice of forgiveness is our most important contribution to the healing of the world." This is what I'm speaking about today. Recognizing the places within us where we have the opportunity to forgive ourselves, sometimes the most difficult work that we do. Also recognizing the places where we can forgive others so that we can make a contribution to the peace process that is happening right now in humanity. I'm telling you, as messy as it is, we are in a peace process. Any person who works or studies or teaches or is activated in any way in peace building will tell you that the process is messy. It just is. And so we just get to be messy for a little while. The thing is that over time, in this experience, peace is most assuredly guaranteed. It must be. It absolutely must be. Our human history is such a great teacher if we pay very close attention to it. There are places in history that were rife and challenged with disharmony and difficulty, and they moved to a place of peace. And there are places in history that are still rife with difficulty, that are currently moving to a place of peace. A while back, I saw something on social media. There was a teacher in a high school classroom who was teaching his students about, of all things, the Salem witch trials, which interestingly are often studied in high school for very good reason. Now, social media has a couple different versions of the details, but here's the gist. And of course, those of you who may not know, the Salem witch trials is a very sad chapter in American history in the United States. They occurred between 1692 and 1693 in Massachusetts, when more than 200 people, mostly women and girls, were accused of being witches. It was essentially a conspiracy theory gone wild, based on fear and ignorance. 20 people ended up being executed, and 5 people died in jail. Well, this particular high school teacher, wanted to teach his students the history and what we could learn from it, from the Salem witch trials. So he told the class that some of them would be witches in this exercise that they were going to undertake, and some of them would be regular people. And then he went around quietly to each student, and he whispered in their ear whether they were a witch or a regular person. I think I would have wanted to be a witch, but that's okay. Then he explained, a good witch. No. Then he explained to the teens that the whole goal of the game was to build the largest group possible that did not have any witches in it. And they could only do this by asking each other questions. So the group that would win at the end of this exercise would have no homework that night. So they were very invested and they were very excited, and the teens just dove right in and they began grilling each other. And at first, a very large group formed. However, with the slightest whiff of guilt, they began to break off into smaller, more exclusive groups, leaving others out. And the teacher observed as they created camps and accused and mistrusted each other. And when the time was up, the teacher finally said, "Okay, you have created your groups." There were lots of different ones. It's now time to find out which group won. Which group will not have homework tonight? He took a deep breath and he said, "All right, the moment of truth. All witches, raise your hands." The high schoolers looked around. Not one single student raised their hand. The kids were confused. They told their teacher something clearly went wrong, to which he replied, yes, something clearly went wrong. Was anyone in Salem an actual witch? Or did everyone just believe what they had been told and then created a story in their mind that they decided to believe? Well, they all had a homework assignment that evening. It was to write a short paper on a time in their life when they believed a story about someone that might not have been true. Brilliant, that teacher. Wish I had him in my high school. How many times have we done that? You know, not having all the information and just filling in the blanks and then deciding the facts. Remember? Those are called alternative facts. Ba-dum-bum. For us humans, junior high school is generally when developmentally we learn that kind of behavior, rumors, spreading gossip, creating camps. And we learn at that age that that can really harm people, that can really hurt people. And when we see this happening in the world today, I mean, just look at the United States today, it does feel like a step backwards. Oftentimes it does feel juvenile. This is why. It's a developmental stage. It can feel often childish, and yet it is just as painful. And now, because we're grown up, it's often dangerous. It is a clear sign when we see this kind of thing in the ethers that we have forgotten that we belong to each other. We have forgotten that we are inextricably connected to one another. We have been for millennia, since before time. We have forgotten that we are each other's keeper. In New Thought, we teach that God, Spirit, is the activity of love in our lives. Not a great definition for God, the activity of love in our lives. And we all come from this one love, or Spirit, or God, and we are all a part of this love. I spoke last week about the idea that God, or Spirit, of course, isn't looming out there, but rather living within us. It is that which breathes us, this indwelling love. It is the most true thing about every being. Joel Goldsmith, one of my favorite metaphysicians, wrote, God, or spirit, source, love, if that word is more comfortable for you, is our selfhood, capital S. God is my selfhood. God is your selfhood. It is God that connects all of us. God is what we all share. The self, capital S, within me is God, just as the self, the capital S self, is God within you. If I rob yourself, whom am I robbing? He writes, myself. If I lie about you, who am I lying about? Me. If I cheat yourself, whom do I cheat? Me. The injustice that I do to another, he writes, I am only doing to myself. The lack of thoughtfulness I show another, I am showing myself. Because there is only one self here. So clearly, he writes, that which I do to another, I do to myself. Jesus taught this very same thing, as did all of the great teachers before him and after in all the great faith traditions. Taking this a step further, Ernest Holmes taught that there is no private good. We've heard that. Some of us have been around for a while. There is no private good. I want to add to that. There is also no private pain. When one of us hurts, the highest vibratory truth, because we are all connected on that same energetic level, is that we all hurt. And I believe that this is really, if you break it down, the crux of what we all came here to really learn, so that we can help move humanity to the lived experience of peace on earth. I think that one of the reasons that we're even still talking about the Salem witch trials, audiences still go see The Crucible. There was a remake on Broadway not that long ago. Arthur Miller wrote about that time. The reason that this story still stays with us is because we recognize ourselves in the characters. All of our humanness, in all of our own humanness, we see the very same universal aspects of ourselves in the story, both the girls who are accused and the accusers. The accusers in their relentlessness to be right. We see ourselves in that. Who among us has not accused at some point without having all the facts? We have within us the proclivity to be both. We know this about ourselves, and when we can bring our awareness to these very human parts of ourselves, when we bring our humanness to this, my loves, we soften our edges so that we can allow room to forgive others. The title of my talk today is The Legacy of Forgiveness. Now, I've spoken at length about forgiveness in several communities around the country. I've written 2 workshops on it and taught a gazillion classes because I believe it is the way. I truly believe that. It is the way to greater peace. I believe forgiveness is one of the most beneficial things that we can be in order to be the activity of love on the planet. Now, I know full well that the concept of forgiveness, of forgiving someone who has really wronged you, may be making some of you scowl underneath your masks. I don't know, I can't see the lower half of your faces, but I'm assuming there are a few scowls. Maybe some of you online are feeling a little squirrely at the idea of forgiving someone for something. Maybe that makes you feel a tightening or tension in your body temple. I understand that. I get it. If you are thinking underneath that mask of yours, oh no, she's going to talk about the F word, fear not. Stick with me, loves. I promise there is so much good and healing about this particular powerful, glorious F word that is forgiveness. Let's reframe it. For those of you who have a hard time with forgiveness, it's glorious. It's not a bad word. It's not a harmful word. It's not a hurtful word. It's a healing word. And the flip side of this is that I know there's also a group of you here who are thinking to yourself, yes, I really want to know how to forgive my second cousin Joe Schmo who is, whatever it may be, knee-deep in conspiracy thinking or putting others at risk or causing rifts or arguments in the family or the work or the community. Some of you have asked me for ways to forgive the people in your lives that are so difficult to forgive. It's part of why I want to address this here today. And a quick review as I begin this conversation. I want to be really clear about what forgiveness is and what it isn't. Even if you've been in this teaching for a long time, it's a great reminder. Most importantly, forgiving someone never means that what they did was okay or in any way acceptable. Forgiving someone never, ever, ever, ever means condoning their behavior. This is huge to really get. Jodi Picoult wrote, "Forgiving isn't something you do for someone else. It's saying, you don't get to trap me in the past. I am worthy of a future." Forgiving another person who has hurt you in any way requires strength because it is a courageous act of self-love. Forgiveness is not ever for the other person. It doesn't even matter if they know that you have forgiven them. That is something totally different. That moves into the area of reconciliation, which is a whole other talk. This is focused completely and specifically on forgiveness. Sometimes, actually, it may be that there was a contentious situation, and it's better if you don't contact the other person. Maybe they have already passed on, but you are still holding some remnant of unforgiveness in your heart. Be gentle with yourself in this. And please remember, it is never, ever for them. It is only for you. The great Nelson Mandela said, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. So many of us are still in a prison of our own making. And I want to be very clear. If there is something really big, something very traumatic that is on your heart, that is wanting to do this work of forgiveness, I invite you to seek out a practitioner, a professional to help you. And what I have discovered is often there are multiple levels of little and perhaps medium things too that we've left unexamined and unforgiven. I'm talking today specifically about the legacy of forgiveness. What does that even mean, the legacy of forgiveness? The word legacy originally meant a group of people on a mission. Legacy means a group of ambassadors. So my invitation today is that we open up to this idea of forgiveness in this collective community here and all over the world online to become ambassadors of forgiveness. Are you with me? Ambassadors of forgiveness, not just like willy-nilly, meh. Ambassadors of forgiveness, yes? All right. Forgiveness for ourselves, forgiveness for each other, forgiveness for those we love, forgiveness for those who are hard to love. That kind of ambassadorship. One of the most important things that is connected to and paired with forgiveness, think peanut butter and jelly, salt and pepper, the sun and the moon, is compassion. You can't have forgiveness without compassion first. Just like peanut butter and jelly, salt and pepper, the sun and the moon, we have compassion and forgiveness. In that order. In that order. You cannot have one without the other. Compassion is always the bridge to forgiveness. And forgiveness is always the result of compassion. If we can get out of our own way and unearth the compassion that lives within us, we can unearth the forgiveness that lives within us. When we have been wronged, when someone has hurt us, often what happens is we forget to give ourselves compassion. When we have been hurt by someone, often we can shrink or retreat, we shut down, or we can puff up and be defensive, reactive, and lash out. Brené Brown wrote, "Don't shrink, don't puff up, just stand your sacred ground." Our sacred ground, my friends, is always the truth that we are worthy. Always. That is our sacred ground, that we are worthy. That is where we start from. And sometimes this can be easy to forget. You know, we can be so influenced by the opinions of others. But here's the thing. Every person, everyone, even those who are hard to love, are just as worthy as you are. They're just as worthy. Everyone has the same capital S self within them. For some, it is hidden under a bushel. For others, it is, stuck in the 7th grade hallway, and their behavior is difficult. But I promise you, again, as Ernest Holmes said, there is no private good, and there is no private pain. The truth is that there is the self, the God self, the place of love within every being. There was a a woman who called into a podcast that I follow. And this woman was from Poland. And she had just visited Germany, where she took a tour of Auschwitz. And you could hear it in her voice how difficult it was. She explained to the host of this podcast that the tour that she took was the day-long tour. It was 6 hours long. And at the very end of it, of this day-long tour, of course, she was feeling the impact and the weight of it all. And her tour guide, the woman who had spent the previous 6 hours teaching this group of people about the history and the atrocities that occurred there, left her group with these final words. She said, "The Nazis provided the propaganda that ended up justifying the murder of 6 million people. And just like the Nazis, governments all over the world are providing the propaganda that is justifying vaccinating millions of people against COVID." Her tour guide at Auschwitz genuinely thought that she could compare the vaccination rollout to Nazis. Completely backwards. Do you see? Are you following me? And this woman on the call, when I listened to this, I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. That she was equating those of us who are vaccinated with the behavior of Nazis. It was horrifying to listen to. Why am I sharing this with you? Because I was so shocked. I was so shocked. Here is clearly a dedicated woman who is dedicating her life to giving tours of Auschwitz for people, to educate people about the dangers of misinformation. And she is spreading it herself. The reason I'm sharing this with you today is because she deserves no less of my compassion than the healthcare workers that are giving the vaccinations. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you follow me? I am reminded of the phrase, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." I think for us, that would be a beautiful mantra to keep us in the energy of compassion. It was fascinating because as I read so many of the comments on this podcast, it was vitriol and attacking, and I understand why. But as I read it, I thought to myself, no. This is a call for compassion. There are a lot of very, very, very good people who have temporarily lost their way right now. And it's deeply sad, and sometimes the impetus can be to recoil, to retreat, to blame, to judge. But the call, as Brené Brown said, is to stand our sacred ground, to stay centered in the middle of all of it, to feel into the compassion which can lead us to the forgiveness. Remember, forgiveness does not ever mean it condones the behavior. It simply means that it creates more peace on the planet. I believe that during this time on the planet that we have all found ourselves in, we are collectively being asked into the profound, regular, and everyday spiritual practice of forgiveness. Because the truth is, we cannot be in the energy of unforgiveness and selfhood, self-love for ourselves and everyone, and also be in active judgment of them. Do you see? It cannot happen at the same time. And so, when we do find ourselves in judgment, I invite you to take a deep breath, to name it. Woof, I'm in some judgment here. Allow that to be named for yourself so that you can then lay it down and go back to the sacred ground of compassion. And forgiving as a spiritual practice actually becomes easier over time, this process. It really, really does. And I just want to, we talked about remembering in spiritual community, remembering the truth. I want for all of us to remember that we can always return to this truth and that we can join together in an active spiritual practice of forgiveness. And over time, it becomes almost a kind of art form, if you will. You all know those days when you're driving on the road and just everything is going so great. There's just not a care in the world. You're driving along, somebody cuts you off the road and you're just like, oh, you must be in a hurry. You know, there's not a single feather ruffled. You know those days? They're kind of magical. And then we have the other days where we're driving and somebody, cuts us off and every feather is flying in the car. Yes? All right. We get to choose. We get to choose. We are always at choice. We can be ambassadors of forgiveness, bringing more peace to the planet, or we can have feathers all over our car. The thing is, we have this call. We are all here to take a stand for what we believe in, and I believe that what we are here for is peace in our lifetime. That is it. Peace in our lifetime for every single human being. This is our legacy. This can be our legacy. But it starts with us. Dr. Martin Luther King taught that forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a constant attitude. It is a constant attitude. This week, if you find yourself in the car, not very happy, I invite you to anchor your memory in this moment. Remember that you are at choice. You can take a breath. You can lay that down. You can say to yourself, I am going to be part of the peace process. I'm going to be a peace builder. I'm going to choose compassion in this moment.